Hello and welcome. What we have here is an outboard, and today's project we are going to be changing out the wiring harness. Now the wiring harness isn't that bad, but you can start seeing the insulation kind of degrading on some of the wires, so just gonna change it. This isn't necessarily hard, but if you've never done one, it seems like I get a lot of I get some questions on this, but what a lot of it is, like, I think is just overwhelming a little bit, if that makes sense, because people don't quite know what they're up against and they don't want to mess anything up. So outboards are pretty not standard, but they're pretty standard, because the coloring on this is the same for 1973 until 1996. And in 96, instead of using a black wire for the ground, they used the black with white stripe, but everything else was kind of the same. It wasn't until the 2000s when the computers and stuff started where you started getting more colors. But even then, the basics of it, like the start and the stop, those are the same. So it's not that hard. But we're not here to talk about changing a wiring harness on a fuel injected motor. Just an old basic carb motor. So what you can do if you want is take every wire off one at a time. Since I know where they go and it's all color coded, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to rip it off and reinstall. We have a red wire connecting to the bottom of our solenoid here. The top of the solenoid is where the battery cable would normally connect, but I don't have one on here yet. The little solenoids are a little funky sometimes. Kind of not tricky, but the wires just don't fall off of them like you'd like. These solenoid studs are long, so rather than being here for an hour with a ratchet, just use my little power drill thing. So we have a solenoid power here. We have the yellow with red stripe, which is our solenoid start wire, and then the bottom one is the ground. So pretty straightforward there. We have a plug here which would go to the VRO pump if we had one, and the big red plug which would go to a controller. If you're doing this on a Mercury, you're going to have a black plug with pins hanging out of it, I think. But the colors and process is pretty much the same thing. So over on this side we got the terminal block, and I think that's where a lot of people kind of get, ooh, there's a lot of wires in there. If these weren't so old looking, you'd be able to tell exactly what they are. You have three wires coming out from under the flywheel, the three yellows, that connect right up here. From there they then go to the voltage rectifier or regulator, and then from there you have one red coming out. Then this red then goes back to the battery and charges it up for you. So these, as long as they're all going to the same spot, it doesn't make much of a difference. Like, you have a red wire here coming off. I'm going to put the terminal back on. So that's one. We then have a gray wire here hooked up to the yellow with gray wire. That gray wire is where our tachometer signal comes from. So I'll just take that off real quick and put this back. And then we have this wire, a little melty, runs that way, which goes right here to the primer or choke solenoid if you have a choke, and activates that. So this is all of the easy basic stuff. So if you've never done one, you can lay your other harness next to it and do one at a time. But if you're a little more familiar with your outboard, just take the whole thing off. So our primer is off. We have a small little wire clip here. Sometimes this is a 2-hole clamp, so you got to undo the bolts. In this case, just twisted it up, and then it runs over the throttle part here and under the terminal block. Kind of goes that way. This is a little stuck in there for some reason. Find out why in a second. Kind of thinking the insulation on it became one with the power pack, but I will soon find out. So you can see our wire right there. It's a little fused together on that piece, but off it comes. Now the only problem is we have a wire going into our connector. This is going to be pretty common. A lot of engines do this. Some of the older ones, the black with yellow wire, which comes off and goes into there, is on a terminal like one of these. So on those, it's easy. That plug's been together for a long time. Alright, plugs came apart as they're supposed to. Gave me a little bit of troubles for some reason. Plug looks fine. It's probably just never been out before. So this is where we're going to need some special tools. We have the female socket, so we need the female socket remover. Here's the part number for the remover. It's basically just a pin. It goes in there and forces the little terminal out. So I find out where it's going and start shoving. And much like the plug, it's not wanting to move, but I'll get it. With that out of the way, our harness is disconnected. Out she comes. It's a little worn. Okay, here's the new harness. It no longer uses the glass fuse. It now uses the ATO fuse, or automotive fuse. I'm going to route the long end of the harness, where the old one was. Through there, like so. The primer wire ran across the block, came out over there, like so. Might as well cinch this thing back down, hold it in there for me. Alright, to get the socket into that plug, you of course need the tool for it. Tool part number is not right there anymore, but it is 322697. What it basically is half of a roll pin molded onto a screwdriver. Actually, it's a roll pin inside of a roll pin inside of a roll pin on a screwdriver. Or is it one roll pin? The other one, the remover, it's a series of roll pins. This is just a normal roll pin cut in half. Gives you that half round approach, so it goes onto the terminal and kind of holds the back and lets you force it in. So you can rig something up, get a hollow tube, slice it, whatever you need to do, because these are $30, I think. And if you're only doing this once, it's kind of silly to buy a whole set. Getting it out is also easy without the tools, because you just really need a way to get inside of there and push it out. So if you have a punch that's small enough, maybe a little pick, or even small enough of a Allen wrench, you can probably do it. So you're supposed to lube this with alcohol and then put it in. I think the theory is by lubing it with alcohol, it kind of gives it some moisture, so when it slides in it's easier, and it being alcohol naturally dissipates. That's my theory here, so I'm gonna do that. You are supposed to lube with alcohol though. So I'll get it started and get wherever I set the installer tool out, and we just kind of force it in until it matches up with the other ones. You can force it too far to where the terminal will pop out the other side, so you want to kind of keep an eye on it. Sometimes it's a little easier than others. Like if you're doing this to a new plug, it's pretty much slides right in. Alright, so that's the other problem with these things. So let's get their tool out. And that is installed. and that is all we really needed to do to that. So we will put our wires back to about where they were. Put our bolts in. Oh, clamp. Yep, going the wrong way. All right, and it slides right back together. So, power pack installed. That thing probably back on where it's supposed to go. Get our lower bolt in. See how the primer wire is a blue with a white stripe? And that's how old this is. Used to be purple. Wire is faded to a different color. So when you're working on these things, that is something you need to be wary of. You took it off over here, and your new one clearly fits. You don't need to worry. Just know that these things get old and colors fade off the wires. I don't like using a flathead on these screws because it's not like it's going into a tapped hole or anything. You're forcing it into a plastic little block, and it just doesn't screw in easy. Alright, so that's in. Wire doesn't affect our lever at all. So we are done on that side. With the flash on, this does not look that pretty. So I am now looking for the nut driver. I don't know if you recall, but so far we've installed the black with yellow stripe, which is our stop circuit, and we've installed the purple with white, which is our choke / primer. We'll put the gray in first because why not? Gray connects to the 2 yellow wires with an old faded gray stripe. Hard to see. Now on some models you would have more wiring that connects here. Like if you had I think a newer version of anything, I think 40 horsepower and above, that had a 4-wire VRO, you would have a purple wire here. Purple wire, solid purple, is power with key on. We don't have that here, so we're not going to worry about it, but you may have that. Also, if you had a power trim and tilt with the relay box built onto the motor, you'd probably have a red with purple stripe here. Red with purple stripe is our fused wire. Solid red means just straight from battery. So that is our new wiring harness installed there. Pretty straightforward. We also have a little thing here. So the 1 is the red on top, 2 would be the yellow with blue, 3 is the yellow with gray, and 4 is solid yellow. So even if we forgot where the gray went, we have our little indicator. Sometimes you also have a little beauty cap that goes over this thing and it tells you where they are. We have this wire here, the tan wire. It's a little old, a little corroded, so we're going to clean up the little terminal here. Get all the old corrosion off. That'd probably do it. We have a little rubber tube that goes over these 2 wires. Gonna install a replacement here. Put a little drop of oil in there. These tubes are pretty hard to slide on and off. So I'll slide it over this if I can. Perfect. The little pinch of oil I put in there, it's really, really helping. With that done, we find our corresponding wire over on this side. Connect them together, and then slide over our little protective boot. Just like so. On some engines you would also have it's called a barrel disconnect, where it just has 2 little, yeah, Same process. So we now have our ground, which went there. Our ground strap, which I don't know why I took it off here. I probably wasn't thinking. Didn't need to come off the solenoid. And then we had on our old harness, wherever I set it, we had this little clamp that held everything together. So I'm going to take that off the old one. It's way too big, but that's okay. See, the old one held the big round fuse body. This one doesn't, so it's a little overkill. I'm gonna probably find one like this size and then put it on there. But for now, it'll work. To plug into the crevice where it goes. The yellow goes onto our solenoid there on the top, just like the one we took off. And our red battery positive goes there. Slip our nut back on. That might have had one of those lock tube washers on it. I'm pretty sure it did. I'll take that nut off later and put it on. I'll check the footage. If it did, I'll put it back on. But I think it goes on the top by the battery terminal. I know one does, I just don't know if they both get it or not. I mean, probably, given my luck. So that is not the side for that. Now we have an extra tan wire. Why? Well, a few different reasons. One of them may be this harness is used on wider range of engines, and that engine would use this terminal. The more likely scenario here, this would be for an external warning horn or overheat light, which we don't have. We as in on my bench. Whatever boat this engine winds up on, it may have, so it may need it. So you don't want to cut it off, you just want to cap it off with some tape or something. So I'll do that. You should see like a late 80s, early 90s 4-cylinder motor. It's got like 3 of these things hanging out of there, a couple of grounds, just wires everywhere. They don't go anywhere. It's just in case you need them on whatever application you're using it on. So don't let the extra wires alarm you. We hooked up our TAN, which is our overheat alarm, which is basically what we're kind of concerned with. That is pretty important. You don't want to overheat your motor. There, looks good. Put a little piece of electrical tape on it, I guess. Perfect. And that is the gist of how to install a harness. It's pretty easy and pretty straightforward. This you may be watching like, I'm never going to need to do that. This is more common than you think. If it ever spent any time out in the sun, like with the hood off, these wires just start breaking down. If it ever got hot, wires start breaking down. If it ever just got old, wires start breaking down. So something to be aware of. All right, everybody. Until next time.